This is Terms of Reference. I'm your host, Stephen Laddick. Lori Thicke has worked in languages for over 20 years. In 1986, she founded the Paris-based Lexcellera, a translation company which today has offices in Paris, London, Buenos Aires, and Vancouver. In 1993, she co-founded Translators Sans Frontières to provide pro bono translations to support global aid work. In 2010, Lori founded Translators Without Borders, now the world's largest community of humanitarian translators. Translators Without Borders supports global aid organizations by donating millions of words of professional translations each year. With the creation of its Translator Training Center in Nairobi, Kenya, Translators Without Borders is actively taking down language barriers to knowledge for some of the world's most disadvantaged people. I spoke with Lori in Vancouver. Hi there, Lori. Thank you so much for being on the Terms of Reference podcast today.
Stephen, thanks for inviting me. I'm really looking forward to our chat.
Where am I calling you today?
Well, today I am in Vancouver, looking over the most stunning day. It's really quite un-Vancouver-like to be so beautiful.
That's got to be fantastic in March when we're recording this.
Yes, it is.
I know that
stupendous.
The Northern Hemisphere has been experiencing some nasty weather, so I'm glad that it's a great day for you. Lori, you founded an organization called Translators Without Borders way back in cyber history in 1993.
Yes, I did.
Tell me about the origins of that. How did that get started?
I guess it really started a lot earlier in the sense that until 1993, while I was at university, I always meant to do something, do volunteer work. And I was always just too busy. I meant to join a crisis line, to help in a soup kitchen, to join Big Brothers, Big Sisters, but I never had the time. And I guess that's maybe true for a lot of people. So after university, I moved to Paris. And once again, I didn't have the time to do volunteer work, even though I wanted to.
Who has time in Paris anyway? I mean, come on.
There we go. So I founded a translation company. And, there's always excuses. But one day, we're Translators Without Borders. Doctors Without Borders came to my translation company and asked for a quote on a translation project. And all of a sudden, it just made total sense that if we did the project for free, then that would be like volunteering, and it would be like donating money to them to do their good work. And that's how we started.
So this was literally like the definition of corporate social responsibility.
Before we knew what it was.
Yeah, wow, that's fantastic. Do you remember what the project was? Or are you allowed to tell us?
Oh, no. So many projects for Doctors Without Borders, Médecins Sans Frontières, have gone under the bridge that I couldn't even begin to think. But each one is tremendously impactful. Sometimes we do witness reports where the world doesn't even know what's going on in a particular corner of the world where maybe the government is persecuting people or there's an epidemic. And so that's among the most gripping of the work we do for Doctors Without Borders is the reports from the field to let the world know what's going on.
This question just popped into my head, but I got to ask it now. How many languages do you speak?
Me, only 2.
Oh, okay.
I am the weak link in the whole language chain.
But, your forte was starting the company, so that's good.
But our translators speak literally hundreds of language combinations, from English to Estonian or Oromo to French, just many language combinations.
I noticed on your website that you have the tagline that you can do anything from Albanian to Zulu. I love that. That's fantastic. Why translation for you? Where did that come from?
Well, that came from a funny place. That came from being an expatriate in Paris. Before I moved to Paris, translation was so not on my radar. I'm not a language person. But once I was in Paris, it just was the obvious thing to do.
And when it was obvious to do, how did you build a company out of that? What you said that you had started a translation company, was that literally sort of you just sort of working out of your back pocket and you put out your plank and said, hey, I do it now? Or did you start in a different way?
No, a little bit like that. I started with one customer and then it was word of mouth. And I had a tiny garret, literally a garret apartment under the roof, under a sloping roof, overlooking the Cathedral of Notre Dame. So it was the typical Paris dream in a way. But here I was running a company out of this tiny garret. And luckily it did get bigger and I didn't have to stay in the garret for too long.
Tell us about how Translators Without Borders actually works. Take us through the process of, how do you receive a request? How do you decide which request to honor? How do you make sure that translations are verified? Take us through that process.
Well, now we're a very different organization than the one I started in 1993 in Paris. So now we're an American-based 501c3 nonprofit. But more than that, we've just become much more professionalized. So there is a translation community called pros.com that provided us and provides us for free a platform. So when we receive requests from nonprofits or NGOs, they can happen automatically. The same way Kiva is using the internet to take some of the friction out of a relationship between a volunteer and someone who needs help, we're doing that to take the friction out of the relationship between the volunteer and the nonprofit that needs help. So it happens rather automatically on our platform, which is donated by pros.com. And once we vet, then that relationship can happen without us. So we vet at both ends. We vet the nonprofit to make sure that they are registered nonprofit, they're doing humanitarian work, and we vet the translators by testing them to make sure that they are reasonably talented translators.
How many requests for translations per year do you receive?
Oh my goodness, so many. As you can imagine, it's a terrific business model. It's very appealing. We'll translate well for no cost.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a lot of requests. We're getting close to 9 million words a year now.
And what would that be in the market?
That's close to $2 million worth of translations that we donate every year.
Holy smokes, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, and that also means the translators who are doing the donating, some of them are literally donating tens of thousands of dollars worth of their time to help nonprofits like Oxfam, Save the Children, Doctors Without Borders, Handicap International, on and on.
Is there a particular quality that you find in your translators that, is there a thread that resonates about why they would donate their time? Or do they come from all walks of life all over the place, or?
They really do come from all walks of life, and some might be starting out, though we do ask that people have been translating for at least 2 years, but others might be retired and they still want to keep translating, keep their hand in it. But the big thing is that, and it's kind of funny to think about, but they feel a much more personal donation when they give their time rather than giving money. And some of them give both. I can see that they actually get a real personal satisfaction from donating their time and being part of the story of humanitarian aid.
Speaking of the stories, is there either a particular job that you can think of over the last, almost 20 years or so, a particular story or a particular moment where a translation that you did or a call for translations really just made a tremendous difference for an NGO or a humanitarian aid agency, or was a game changer in some way, or had a surprising result?
There's two different really kinds of ways that we do translations. I can think of a story for both. One of the ways that we do translations is we support nonprofits if they need to communicate with donors, train volunteers, explain about a new medical protocol, and we do those in largely European languages. So one nonprofit that I know of is called Zafin, and we translated their website into French and Spanish. They're a nonprofit that does microcredit with women in Haiti. So after the earthquake, they started helping women start their own businesses and build houses for families. So we were able to track exactly what we contributed because those two websites in one year generated $600,000 for Zafin, which
Wow.
meant that was $600,000 that could go directly into their programs because of the volunteers who worked on the two language websites.
That's a huge impact. And what about the other line of work?
Well, then the other kind of translations we do, so the first kind is supporting nonprofits and helping them save money and do more. The other kind is actually access to knowledge, where we are working in really small neglected languages to bring information out there. And One of the things I'm most proud of recently is our work with Ebola.
Tell us about that.
Well, at the very beginning of the crisis, I don't know if you remember, Stephen, but people were in Liberia, in Sierra Leone, they were saying, it's not real, it's a government plot. So a lot of the big first effort was to try to convince people it was real. But part of the problem that we identified is that the messaging was going out in English in communities where only 15 to 20%, up to 30% actually spoke English. So it was coming in a foreign language, and it's pretty hard to convince somebody of the danger, of the need to take precautions, of the need to change the whole way you operate. For example, how you bury your dead, when you're talking to them in a foreign language. So we really raised awareness of the need to talk to people in their own language, to build trust, and also to communicate the message accurately, because it's pretty hard to glean important information in a foreign tongue. And that, we believe, started to make a change, really started to make a change in the messaging. And we also provided translations in many of the languages, in the local languages for those areas, plus for Nigeria as well.
Do any of your translations ever, do you ever do real-time stuff? Do you ever send people on the ground and to do real-time work?
We did a little bit after the typhoon in the Philippines, but mostly that's not what we do. I mean, we could, if someone said this, we need someone, and can you help us find someone? Certainly we could. But mostly we're text-based rather than,
Oral based, yeah.
oral-based. Yeah.
How much work are you turning away?
We do turn away some work. I mean, obviously some because it's not humanitarian, and others just because in some language pairs that you might not expect, we have shortages. For example, French English, we have, and English French, we have shortages of translators.
So it's because of the PROS platform and the network of translators that you have. It's the capacity of the system really is infinitely scalable and limitless ultimately, but you've had enough capacity to undertake the requests that you've had thus far.
Well, definitely the technical infrastructure, you're right, is scalable. Another place where I really wish we had more resources is in African languages. Like we have a project where we work on Wikipedia, just getting medical information into the local languages, because people with cell phones, I mean, you have 65, 75% penetration rates, depending on the country in Africa. And a lot of that information is freely available. Like, for example, Wikipedia in some countries is freely available with no data charges. So there's a real opportunity to help people understand how their children get malaria, how AIDS is transmitted, and to give them the kind of information that we have access to.
Yeah, for sure. I noticed that you name 4 specific projects on your website. One of them is the HEAT project, which I think maybe you're talking about right now. Maybe take us through a couple of those projects, and are those funded by specific donors or a specific, pool of money, or how did you decide on those particular projects?
A lot of work is done volunteer, but we do every once in a while. We can get a major project funded. We've never had Wikipedia. Oh, no, that's not even true. We've had Indigo Foundation out of London has actually sponsored some Wikipedia work in African languages, and that is really exciting. They're also now funding some disaster relief, as is an organization called HIF, Humanitarian Innovation Fund, that's administered by Save the Children. And they are also sponsoring pre-translating disaster relief information, so that in a disaster, because everyone's got cell phones now, in a disaster, the information can be broadcast in the right language.
That sort of leads me down a line that I like to go in these conversations with technology, especially. I know that in your other professional life, let's call it that for right now, we all wear multiple hats. A lot of the work that you do is focused on machine translation or real-time automated translation. Do you see that coming of age right now in a way that could benefit the humanitarian community?
Yes, but funnily enough, not to the extent that the humanitarian community is expecting it. I've noticed people thinking that it's going to be the be-all and end-all. But the problem with machine translation, or the limitation, is that you need a lot of data to build an engine. And in some of those small local languages that you want to communicate in, they don't have the data to build a good engine.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we see the Bing and the Google engines in French and Spanish and English, and they're extremely robust and great engines. But do we have that amount of text in Dinka to build a good engine? We don't. And I find the humanitarian community does expect that, oh, machine translation is going to solve everything, but there are limitations for smaller languages.
What about when you look out for Translators Without Borders for the next, let's just call it 5 years? Is there a way that you foresee the platform changing or the model changing, or perhaps the number of translators you have? What do you see as the organization continues to carry on? How will it change?
One way we're changing is we are doing more disaster relief work. I would love to see the platform become even more automated, because I think that's the real power. As you were saying earlier about scaling, I mean, that's the real power. If we can totally get out of the relationship and just make it about the nonprofit and the volunteer working together.
That's
And
fantastic.
we also need to do a lot more training of community translators so you have, for example, different countries of West and East, North and South Africa. You have incredible linguists, but very, very little training or tools available for translators. Now, those people could be incredible crowdsourced translators for translating information for their communities. And that's a place that we really want to be involved in as well.
Mm-hmm. How do you see these changes coming about? What's the staff situation look like at Translators Without Borders? How many people are sort of manning the ship these days?
We have a lot of volunteers
Mm.
and very, very few paid staff. We have a program director, a part-time global coordinator, a part-time project coordinator, and a small staff of translators in a training center in Nairobi, and that's it. So you must encounter this with many nonprofits. It's extremely hard to be nimble
Mm-hmm.
when you have only busy, busy, busy volunteers.
Sure. Do you find that donor funding is not available for this? Is it difficult to acquire? Do you have do you have a model for attracting that kind of funding?
I think it hasn't been so difficult to acquire when we've had the time to make a grant application. It's just one of those catch-22s
Yeah,
where you're too busy to do some of that important groundwork.
that's really interesting. Yeah. I know that you're a board member now, so you're not in the day-to-day operations. How do you continue to grow that organization without those staff? Is there a way that you could reorganize, or a way that you could dedicate funds to make sure that you have the ability to continue to develop business, to develop new funding, or work on some of these special project initiatives? Is there a way that you could restructure, or a vision you have for that?
That's exactly what we're doing. So on our board, I don't know if you've noticed, but we have some extremely powerful and just skilled executives. And we're actually in the midst of a reorg with their talents to start looking at how we can scale up, because the need is huge. And also, we do need to attract the funding to hire a chief executive. I think that would take us quite far.
Well, I guess we'll put the call out when we post this podcast out there.
Oh, great.
Anybody who wants to give money, we have a good use for it here. What's the kind of turnaround time that you have on translations? Does it matter of obviously size and length and number of words, these kinds of things? But give us a sense of how you prioritize, or how your translators prioritize the type of work that they do, and what's the turnaround time?
Well, first of all, they choose. So with our platform, we put the call out. We say there's this translation that needs to be done, and they choose. And if it's not humanitarian enough, even if it's for a very good cause, but maybe it's an accounting booklet,
Sure.
it's going to be slower to be picked up.
Okay.
So, and then the other thing is, because the translators are volunteers, they usually have to fit it around their daily work. So while the rule of thumb in the industry is 10 pages per day, it might take longer than that because people are working at nights after they put the kids to bed.
Do you think these are also people, I'm sort of going out on a limb here, that we'd also maybe find on Odesk or Elance or that kind of thing?
I really don't know what the overlap there would be. I know they're the kind of people you also find on pros,
Mm-hmm.
but it's pretty much the professional translator community. And I simply don't know if the professional community is on Odesk or Elance.
Sure. Has there ever been a time when you've had to sort of put out a fire because a translation went wrong, sent out the wrong message, or just sort of got it completely wrong, and either it affected an operation or sent the wrong message in a disaster situation, something like that?
No, but we definitely have had to put out some fires with the translation not arriving on time. That happens. The translator sends a translation or thinks they close up their computer, they go off skiing, but the file didn't transmit.
How has that affected? Do you have one of those stories about maybe a time that you had to do a quick translation yourself or find somebody else to redo work? Or
We've definitely had situations where we have had to have the work retranslated in a terrible hurry, which means you have to give 2 pages to a number of different translators and get them all to come together and still try to meet that deadline. So it's happened where we've had, say, 3 weeks, a really nice deadline to translate something. The file didn't transmit or for whatever reason it didn't arrive. And then we had a day to redo the whole job and deliver it.
just a couple more questions. The first one is, why did you move Translators Without Borders to a U.S. 501c3? Was there a particular reason why that made more sense, either logistically or financially?
Well, it made sense in the sense that even though I'm Canadian, that really it seems like the core of humanitarian work is coming out of the United States, and that was where we wanted to be.
Have you found that it's made a difference in your visibility or in your ability to communicate your services to others?
Sure. I mean, there's a huge credibility of being an actual registered charity, with a 501c3 status.
Sure.
It does make a huge difference. About half of our board members are American as well. We're just spread out all over the world. But
Is there ever a time when you don't have a translation going on?
no, never. Never.
I wondered that because, if I'm quite honest, we found Translators Without Borders through a third party, much like you say, through word of mouth. And I've been in this business for 10 years and had never heard of it before. Do you find that is often the case? Do you find most of your translations are happening with the same organizations, or are you always sort of taking on new clients and new projects?
Well, put it this way, we're not out there looking for new clients, given that it's a model where they don't have to pay the usual charges that they would have to pay for translations. We're pretty popular.
Oh yeah, I can imagine.
And so one of our favorite, if we ever did have downtime, which we never do, one of our favorite projects is Wikipedia, because it is so scalable. It's such a scalable way of leveling the playing field in terms of access to information.
Lori, the last question that I always ask everyone on the Terms of Reference podcast is one that I'm interested to hear what your response is to. You said that when you were younger, you left university, you kind of always wanted to contribute, you kind of always wanted to volunteer. You've now founded an organization that's been wildly successful in humanitarian terms over the last 20 years. What's the one or two pieces of advice that you'd give to somebody who is either coming out of university right now, looking for a career in aid and development, or someone who's maybe transitioning or wants to use their skills in the aid and development world? What advice would you give them about how to be successful?
Part of the answer is in your question for me is using your skills, not imagining that some other skills will do that you think the market wants. But my particular skill is starting things. That's my skill. So that's the one that I used. And I think it's really important that people find out. That's a bit of a tough one, but find out what you and only you can do, and then do that one thing.
Lori, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a really interesting conversation.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure to be on your podcast, and I just wish you all the luck with all the other interesting interviews you have.
You've been listening to the Terms of Reference podcast from aidpreneur.com. Subscribe to us on iTunes.